Today's video is a talk that I gave in Tennessee about one of my favorite new subjects. A huge shout out goes to my colleague, Dr. Will Suve, who has joined me in this curious and fascinating topic about the role of GLP-1 hormones, both the ones we naturally make and the ones we supplement, in the brains of addiction. Thanks also to Marty, who was an audience member who was quick enough to film this on her iPhone so that we can share it with you. I think you're going to love it.
First of all, I as I was driving here, my nurse lives in Morristown, Tennessee, and I have my number one assistant who lives in Knoxville. So Tennessee is where a major part of our company exists, even though I'm from Tampa. And on the way here, I said, yeah, I'm going to read the room to see what I talk about tonight. Because I do a lot of these speeches, but there has been a topic that has been very interesting to me. And as I look at folks in the carnivore, as well as the medical space, there's a conversation that's been whispered. And I have had a few great interviews over the last month trying to answer a question. What is the reason that we see hedonic behavior? The kind of behavior that we all love to do, sex, good food, that alcohol that turns into a couple of drinks, the kind of behavior that you don't tell people about, but you get such joy out of, that it can become pathologic. What is it about the hedonic behavior that seems to get so much better on a carnivore diet? And we're also seeing it with GLP-1s. So GLP-1s are those hormones that started out a few years ago where they gave a whole bunch of them, called it Ozempic, and have everybody in Hollywood take one. And if you need to see hedonic behavior, the hedonism inside Hollywood couldn't be a better example. And they whispered about it there. I'd go to the conferences for physicians and you'd hear them say, they stopped drinking when I gave them Ozempic. They stopped drugging. They stopped. You're like, what? That doesn't happen. So you think, okay, it's Hollywood. You write it off and don't think about it again. And then the conversation changes. The hormones changed on the stage of GLP-1, now became GLP-1 GIP. These are the two hormones found in Zepbound or tirzepatide. And last October, an incredible article came out that the phase 2 trial on the upcoming hormone, that is the GLP-1, that's your Ozempic. Now we had GIP, the second hormone, which is your Zepbound or your tirzepatide. And then there's a third hormone that's in the upcoming ones that is the retatrutide is the most popular name that's coming out. But what it really looked at was we could see brains reverse in age. We could see somebody, the biggest enemy in my practice, I've been an internist for 25 years, and the score against Parkinson's and Dr. Boz is Parkinson's 1 every 1, Dr. Boz 0. Not one of them didn't die from the disease. I mean, they may have had a death earlier, but the disease had riddled their brains and bodies. And it's in those brains that we're seeing this hormone do something that I've never seen before. And so as much as that headline of Ozempic is the easy way out, you're going to not, this is a hormone that you shouldn't be using. We have the second hormone and it's doing other things. And that's where we started to hear the psychiatrists say, can I write that? And I contend, as an internal medicine doctor focusing on brains and having a lot of addiction patients under my belt, the number one writer of these prescriptions coming up is going to be the psychiatry team. I think addiction medicine will start with retatrutide, the one that's not on the market yet. And it is particularly because that hedonic behavior, the one that starts out when you're a teenager and you have that first shot of alcohol and your teacher said, say no to alcohol because it's a depressant. But you took a shot of that and said, that was not depressing at all. I'm doing that again. And that was dopamine. And the place that dopamine came out of your brain is called the ventral tegmental area, the VTA. And we know that if we did a functional MRI and we saw that first shot of alcohol, it made dopamine fire. This is exactly what the pleasure center of your brain looks like. And when you hit it once and then you waited a week till you could find another place to get a shot of booze, then it happened again. And then it happened again. And then you find yourself in that early 20s and you're doing it all the time. And now, instead of that joyful pleasure center, you really notice that when you didn't take alcohol, you started to crave it. And you thought about it during work, but it wasn't appropriate. And so you're trying to figure out, how can I get to the end of the day? And well, my dad had 2 beers at the end of the day, so I think I can start that at 5 o'clock. And the thought of the booze became all consuming. And when you finally took it, you didn't get pleasure. You just got relief. You weren't thinking about it anymore. Take my carb addict. And you'll have my friends and colleagues in neuroscience say, you cannot be addicted to food. It is not an addiction. And then you take care of a carb addict and you say, well, better call them a carnivore recover. They've recovered through carnivore and that's their God now, is carnivore is everything because, my God, it took away all these problems. And so you interview them and say, all right, before you went carnivore, tell me about a bad day. Well, I mean, I had carbohydrates here, and I had processed food here, and I had carbohydrates here, and I had processed food here, and I tried to stop. And when I would try to stop and I'd go on a diet, I would think about food all of the time. And I would white knuckle it and say, okay, I made it till 5 o'clock. And then I would eat. And they would feel, do you remember what you felt when you'd finally satisfied that, I'm going to put this in air quote, hunger for food? Did you feel dopamine? Did you feel joy of eating? No, they usually feel relief. The same thing that alcoholic, even if he doesn't want to call him that at this stage, that he craves alcohol and he doesn't get joy from it, he just gets relief. Let me just, in a parallel universe, talk about a 13-year-old girl who quits because it feels better. And the first time she quits, that pain gives her dopamine. It feels good, people. And everybody says, what? And then she quits again, and the dopamine feels better. And she does it just like that booze. She took it a few times that week, and she had joy. And then she did it so often that if she didn't, the obsession about became her life. And as soon as she didn't have dopamine joy, she had relief. Talk to a Nick. They don't feel joy anymore. They just puke and they feel relief. It's this pattern that's happening in your brain, the ventral tegmental area, that VTA where the dopamine comes out of. There's a special receptor in there, and it's actually a mu receptor of opioids. It's like highly associated with the opioid epidemic, and as quickly as become alcoholic or a chronic or a bulimic, if you want to see the fastest way to abuse that receptor, try out some opiates, and I can have you addicted in about 12 days. That is dopamine exhausted, and now you crave it. And you can't seem to let go of it, and it's the way you cope. And when you would start to hear people on carnivore come to you saying, I just can't believe how my noise in my brain is better. Yes, the first week was a little bit of hell, and I had a few hiccups at the beginning when I thought I could just go have some of that other life, but then I just got back to the rules, and about the third attempt at staying carnivore, I'm in like the third week of this, and I just wonder where all that chaos went. It's not there. And they talk just like my alcoholics. They talk just like my people in recovery. Except there's no diagnosis. And if you try to take this over to the neuroscientists, they think you're crazy. Until about the last year, where they looked at where this GIP and GLP-1 receptors are. Those are the hormones that we're manipulating in these injectable drugs that change how your body feels reward, that change how your body feels the dopamine that should be an episodic event. And we should feel pleasure and dopamine. Our brains weren't wired to get addiction. Our brains were wired to feel joy, to have sex and really take joy out of eating every once in a while, to have that episodic pleasure that is part of being human. And when the patient comes to my office as an internist and they're 56 years old, I can think of a very specific patient who is at least 70 pounds overweight, has been for a decade, and has tried everything I can give them. I have scolded and shamed and tested and drugged and tried and cajoled to say, you're headed for trouble. And she wants to get better. Her addiction is processed food, but we don't even talk about that. We talk about her hemoglobin A1C and her cholesterol and her high blood pressure and her weight and her foot hurts and her knees in bad shape and all of the pain that grows. And when we put her on a ketogenic diet, so that's where carnivore is a great diet. If I start by selling carnivore, I sometimes lose them. I used to lose them at keto. My husband says it's too scientific of a word. You need to say something better. I'm like, it's called fat. He said you shouldn't use that word either. They're not going to follow you at all. About the time you can convince them of a ketogenic diet, then the carnivore becomes very popular. But what does the successful ketogenic diet look like? They're carnivore. I just don't sell that from the beginning. The amount of carbohydrates that they can consume is so minimal because the pathology inside their body shoots that insulin up and keeps them inflamed, and especially those little cells in the ventral tegmental area of the brain where they get to feel joy, where they get to feel dopamine. And they have been abusing that through the way they eat food for the better part of 3 decades. And when they stop eating processed food, they go through a withdrawal. They have a heck of a time. And when we can start to measure, are you on the other side of that? One way to measure that is, are you making ketones? The other way is, can you go without thinking about your pleasure, your relief? And when the carnivore diet has flipped over to the place where the noise settled down, that's also the place where that mood got better. And they don't often like to talk about that. It's like, oh, yeah, my mood's better because, and then they'll come up with some things. But it really has to do with this area in the brain that rewards you with pleasure. And when you constantly pummel it, it cannot have a reset button, and your ability to feel joy is absent. Just like the alcoholic can't get joy out of that drink anymore. But they get relief when they finally satisfy the noise. And when you take away those carbohydrates and you say, here's the rules, they're simple, eat meat. If it didn't have 4 legs, don't eat it. Well, I guess chickens have 2. So whatever the rules are for getting on carnivore. It doesn't have legs, but then there's a fish, so whatever. Anyway. But that change in their brain happens about the time ketones show up. We really know it's there if ketones have been there for about 18 to 21 days, almost that 3rd week. We know even if that brain had a hole, and I mean a hole that does not conduct the messages that we want anymore, because inside the cell, it was so swollen, so inflamed, it could only attempt to function and never had space to heal and reset. And that's not how brains work. They need to shut down and wake up and shut down and wake up. And because it's swollen, it couldn't do that. So this area of the brain is offline, and it's been bathed in ketones for 21 days, and now the mood was better, and the noise was less. And we watch in that functional MRI, this ventral tegmental area in a less cravings are happening is because, there's lots of becauses, but one because is the receptors for those hormones of GLP-1 and GIP are in that area. And when you look at people that aren't as ill as my patient at 65 who's been overweight, 56, overweight for a better part of 3 decades, her body doesn't make that hormone anymore. That hormone comes from a part of her gut that has been so inflamed, so leaky, so abused. But the cell that makes the hormone, this L cell, there's only a few of them in your body, but it could only do it when the inflammation is low, when the slime layer is good and thick. It protects that body, and then that cell can do its job, make that hormone, and it goes right to your brain. And it will park in this place where you get to feel joy again. But she hasn't made it in 3 decades. And when you give this to her, you can see it show up first in that brain, in that ventral tegmental area. In the same place that a carnivore diet, a keto carnivore specifically, getting those ketones, having that inflammation go down, that part of the brain tends to repair the fastest, and we see the best restoration of the messages in the area. And when I look at some of the dangers that are out there for GLP-1s, so I'll give you a brief history of how I've been choosing to use these drugs, because they are tools. That 56-year-old has been through one of my lead classes where I enter you into a program. It's called 21-Day Kick, and you are in a class where you check your glucose and your ketones every morning. You're in a little tribe of positive peer pressure to change your behavior. And we do the best medicine I've done in 25 years. At the end of those 3 weeks, it's not my job to take care of you. I pass that responsibility on to these 10 little groups, and you guys take care of them. You're on your own, but you've all been trained. And that past responsibility is probably the secret sauce, that they now have the ownership if this is going to work, and it's not up to your doctor to do it. It never was. Don't leave us with that responsibility. It fails over and over. But as she did this class, she would get into a ketogenic state. She'd do that sardine challenge. She'd fast for 72 hours. She would do everything we asked. And when the support was amazing, she did great. And she'd lose a little weight, and then the class would end, and she'd still have her meeting once a week, but the support wasn't enough for her. And she'd fail, better than she's ever been, but fail to reverse these health problems. And so this past class, right in the end of January, we offered a microdosing of GLP-1. And at the entrance of that drug, something in her brain turned on. She took that hormone for the first time, and her body got to see something that should have been there all along, but she couldn't make it. Even though she'd done a bunch of healing, she'd been better. And by delivering that hormone every day for the last 12 weeks, she's lost another 20 pounds, but she says, I don't care. That noise in my brain is gone. That energy that everybody talks about on this keto diet, and I've done everything you've asked me to, Dr. Boz, I never got to feel that. And I feel it. And that gift of what most people receive on a carnivore diet is the restoration of their hormones. You'll know you're close to having a perfect reversal of the problem when you're close to your ideal body weight. That metric still matters a lot. And when this gal had spent all those decades overweight, and she took off another 20 pounds, she has several to go, but her brain is the healthiest she's ever seen it. Her ability to interact with her family and do her life, it's what God designed her for. And she's been in a cloud. And as you give this microdosing of this hormone, you put that back in her body, it starts to prime that this is what it looks like to use it. And it's a theory, because these drugs are new and I'm learning. As I help people with this, saying, okay, here's what I know about addiction. I'm going to do one more parallel because I think it will help the room say, where do I think these drugs are going, and why do I think the carnivore diet is still the better answer if you can get the results. And that is chronic alcoholism. That's the number one addiction that ended up in my clinic. It was sad. It didn't take much for them to tip over into that use of alcohol to the abuse of alcohol. Almost always, something in life didn't go right, and Satan is real, and then they're stuck. And how do you come out of it? But booze was a good thing for them, and it was a tool that got them through the moment. And then they thought that tool was going to work in every situation, and it didn't. And I was practicing in South Dakota, where we have more cows than people. We also have several Native American reservations where the alcoholism is 45% of the community. just pause for a second and think about 45% of the community is a chronic alcoholic. That's 45% of your preachers, 45% of your teachers, 45% of the people running the jail, 100% of the people in the jail. The community was just riddled with this. And there's a drug out there that can stop you from feeling pleasure from alcohol. It absolutely covers up this little receptor in the ventral tegmental area that gives you pleasure. It's actually an opioid receptor, but the opioid receptor is the one right before making dopamine. If you can stop that, whatever you've been abusing, sex, drugs, rock and roll, we can take that number 9 wire and turn it off. You're not going to feel pleasure from if that's what you felt. You're not going to feel pleasure from puking if that's what you felt. But it's FDA approved to not feel pleasure from alcohol. So I can give you a shot of this. You bring me a chronic alcoholic, I give you a shot of this, and it's going to be effective for a month. It costs $1,000. Mm-hmm. And they walk out the door, and I said, go drink. Like, you are my favorite doctor. I'm in here for booze, and you're telling me to go drink. I'm like, yep, go drink. I'll see you in a month. And they come back and say, I don't know what it was, but you did something to my booze. Every time I drink, people tell me I'm an asshole when I drink, but now I know I am. I said, how many times you black out from drinking over the last month? Not once, Doc. I can't drink that much. I said, now wait, you came into here with your 4th DUI, assigned to me by the judge that I stop you from drinking. And you went from that to not being able to drink enough to black out, which was non-existent in his life. I said, all right, so what's your conclusion at the end of the month? He goes, well, I want another one of those shots. And I don't think this tool is working for me anymore. I go, that's a sensible thing. So the next month goes by and the drinking gets less and we start to work on the behavior, the stuff that led to this, unpack the trauma. And in this time, the number of receptors asking for alcohol to have relief, not dopamine, relief, downregulate. And he says the same things, like the noise for booze just isn't there anymore. Same thing you hear with Carnivore. Same thing you hear with GLP-1s. And then we get to about month 5, 6. He's routinely going to a recovery group, 12-step group. We talk about their faith, that you're not going to, there's 3 legs to this stand. If you don't develop your faith, we're going to fail. So we get them involved in a community service and make sure that there's God in that. And they're doing great. But there is the risk with that drug, because anybody know what drug I'm talking about that's not a physician? Okay, yeah, so it's not very well talked about. It's a great drug. It does work, especially Native American where there's not a doctor around for 300 miles. This stops them from drinking. But it's $1,000 a shot and they got to come to me to get it in their butt. And the danger was when they took that really high dose, covered that receptor, didn't get any joy out of that new receptor, other things in their life changed too. They didn't get pleasure. They just was like, meh, I'm here. I'm alive. No, I'm not drinking. Got any ideas or hopes, dreams for the next week? Nope, just here. And you'd see this muted life, which was way better than what we had before, but not really. And so there's a drug that you can use that's intermittent. Same drug, but you put it in your mouth. You swallow it under your tongue is the best place for it. You take the drug before you're going to be exposed to temptation. So when they get to this higher level of, okay, we've got a few things going right. We got the behaviors, you've got the community, you've got a rhythm of how life gets better. We know that if we send you out with just the shot and you don't have friends and family that are helping you do this, if you didn't find a tribe of other people encouraging you, and when you stumble, somebody can say, hey, be nice to yourself. We've all made mistakes. Try again. That level of encouragement of community mattered a lot. And we work on that and take away the drug and say, now I want you to take the pill every time you think you're going to be tempted. You come to an event where there's alcohol, take the pill ahead of time. You're going to the company Christmas party, take the pill ahead of time. And we could start to see that they would get this result for the 2 to 3 hours that the drug would work. And now they were feeling pleasure in other areas. And if you're curious, type up the Sinclair method is one of the treatments for alcoholism that is very popular, but written nowhere in the medical books. It's not covered. It's not scientific. This is not what addiction doctors teach. But by God, it works. And they are able to say, I just don't want it. And they resist that temptation in a moment, not in a plateaued level of a hormone that is there all the time. So as I look at what the benefits are for a brain that has had too much noise for food because of the season we live in with abundance, ease of access to food, and the process level is over the top. A carnivore option is easy rules with a great runway forward. And if you've come into the space and found, yep, the noise in my brain is less. I'm doing better. I have lost weight. I feel better. What's the next step? It is to make sure you're still getting the dopamine, the pleasure center, from other places in your life besides food. Because what was happening in that alcoholic that had found this tool, abused it until we got into trouble with the law, and now I shut it off. You can't feel it at all. Well, that's not going to work. Because when you were 13, you were supposed to have other things that developed to provide you with dopamine. They should have been friendships and doing service for others, being in relationships, telling stories, accomplishing things, setting a goal, being on a tribe or a team and reaching for something hard and saying yes. Sure, sex, drugs, and rock and roll were probably in there as well, but your brain should have developed those spider webs for reward. And when you practice the alcohol, you got a number 9 wire that now was out competing every other one of those. So when you come into the carnivore diet and say, I just can't believe how much better I feel. Can I go off of it? And everybody says, no, you can't. Like, are you healthy enough to go off of it? Well, here's a test. How do you make dopamine? How do you get that ventral tegmental area to give you pleasure? And if that pleasure is still like, oh, I don't do that anymore. No, I don't get pleasure from food. I don't do that anymore. I'm telling you, you're headed for relapse. That brain isn't built that way. It's built to have joy. It's built to have community. And I can tell you the neuroscience of it. It's fascinating to me. And I look at my patients over the last 12 weeks that have had this micro dose of hormone put in them, and they have been a magical awakening that they haven't felt as long as they can remember. And they're reversing their weight, but this isn't my hope for them forever. It is to restore those other spider webs of how dopamine is made, how pleasure happens in their brain, that we can get them off of the drug, that they can make these hormones on their own, and we get them as close to ideal body weight as possible, because that's where the healthiest brain comes from. So I want to commend you for being at an event like this, being here ahead of time to say, how can we help make this successful? Because it is the secret sauce to being in recovery. For alcohol, for carbs, whatever you're addicted to, is the community. That when Dr. Kiltz was talking earlier about finding it reminded me of something that I think of when I'm raising boys, when I'm helping patients, when I'm trying to be the best wife I know how to be. And that is there's an early season to life and a later season to life. And that tipping point in life is, are you doing what God designed you to do? And sometimes you don't think you know what that is. But I've been to seasons where I've tried to be something that I thought I wanted to be, but God clearly wasn't behind that. And when I'm doing what God asked me to do, it's easy. Gosh, the dopamine just flows. When I'm teaching people about what it is I've learned and how to help them be healthier, it really doesn't need to have a price tag with it. It just feels good. And I'm pretty sure my ventral tegmental area is on fire.